Hi everyone, this is lesson 7.02, The Changing West. We're picking up with where we left off with 701, the Great American Desert. When we left off with 701, we were talking about new industries that developed in the West, such as cattle driving, mining, timber, the discovery of oil, and farming. So there were lots of industries out west that were continuing to develop. And if we look at this map on page 469, you can see the areas that developed most for each industry. So for gold, silver, and copper mining, you can see that there were individual areas all over the map throughout the West where these mineral deposits were actually discovered. But there was a lot of grassland throughout the middle portion of the country, the area that we know as the Great Plains. And that's where most of the cattle ranching did occur. But again, remember, the cattle driving era, the free open range era, ended in about the 1890s because of overgrazing and the use of barbed wire. It was very difficult for cowboys to drive their cattle to market when people were starting to divide up their land and fence it off with barbed wire. So you can get a sense by looking at this map of where the major industries were as far as cattle ranching, mining, logging, and you can even see where the major railroad lines were and the cattle trails were by the green lines and the red lines. The red lines are the railroads and the cattle lines are in green. And you can see how important the railroad was to producing these industries, to keeping them connected to their marketplaces. So all of this was developing at the same time. Now, one of the things we really have to look at is the incredible growth in population in the Midwest, okay, and in the prairie or the Great Plains area. And the biggest reason for that increase in population and farm settlement was the Homestead Act that we'll talk about in a minute. For this lesson, we're going to focus on describing the beginnings of the timber and oil industry in the West, explain how the federal government gave away land to individuals through the Homestead Act, and describe life for most farmers in the plains where they lived and the hardships that they faced. In our last lesson, we talked predominantly about cattle and we talked about mining. In this lesson, they're going to be talking a little bit more about timber and oil and the areas in which they were discovered. Okay, and there was a lot of it discovered within the West as people became better and better at looking for oil deposits and tapping into that. They would start to find in the 1890s large underground oil reservoirs in California, Kansas, Texas, and even in Indian territories. And we always know that when valuable resources are found on Native American land, they were very quickly pushed off of those areas, and the industry would eventually take over. So, yet another development in the progression of the West was the use of timber and the use of oil. One of the biggest places that oil was discovered is a place that we commonly associate with it today, which is Texas. And if you can see here, that is a place that it was commonly found. And on January 10th, 1901, a drilling team found a very, very big deposit in Spindle Top Hill. And that became one of the most widely productive oil wells in the country. So Texas became a very profitable place for the oil industry as we know it today, and especially in the Gulf of Mexico. We find that true today as well. Now, one of the reasons why the prairies, the Great Plains, were actually populated so quickly had to do with something that the Lincoln administration again did. Remember, Lincoln was also involved in railroad legislation that gave a lot of money to the railroads. The government was very much involved with funding railroad operations, but they were also very involved in expanding the West by giving away free land. Yep, that you heard me right. The government was actually giving away free land. About 160 acres per claim. If you were above 21 years of age and you went out to go and settle that area for 5 years, you would get that land. And it was definitely a way to promote people going out and settling the West. Territories in the West could not become a state until they were populated. Until they had a certain population, they were just known as territories. So that was part of getting people out there. The railroads would advertise, free land would be given by the government. So the government and the railroads worked together quite a bit to get the West settled. But the Homestead Act of 1862 was definitely one of the major reasons that there was a very rapid settlement of the Great Plains during the mid to late 1800s. Now, the people that were going there, they weren't just people who were farming already in the Northeast or in the South on their own. They were also ex-slaves who came out to this territory to start over and have their own land to get away from the racial tensions in the South. Now, they would eventually find racism out here in the Great Plains as well, but it was a little bit of a place to start over and reestablish themselves. So it became a really common place for people to go and try to establish themselves there after the war. African Americans really turned to the Great Plains as a place of opportunity. Now, Oklahoma would be a place that would open up actually as a result of President Benjamin Harrison. After many settlers begged the White House to open up Oklahoma to settlement, he would finally give in and do so. In April of 1889, a whole bunch of people would gather on the border here of Oklahoma Territory, ready to race into the territory, as you see in the pictures here, and get ready to settle and take the land that they would claim as their own. So it basically was open, first come, first serve. If you guys have ever seen the movie with Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise, Far and Away, that's the scene where they're racing towards a plot of land that had to do with the opening of the territories in the West under the Oklahoma Act. Now, just because you could get the land easily didn't mean that life was easy on the Great Plains as a farmer. There was a lot of very hard work to do. It was hard to keep things clean, especially when you were living in a sod hut. Yes, I said sod. Most of the farmers had to live in makeshift cabins or homes that were established by what little wood could be found. But on the Great Plains, there was very little wood to be had. So a lot of times their homes were actually made out of sod. And you can see the dirt and mud being used for this home down here at the bottom. They were called soddies. If you see this down at the bottom, without timber, settlers adapted by building soddies made from bricks or dirt and matted grass. And that's actually what they lived in. You can imagine how difficult it would be to keep things clean and warm or cool. I guess it would be cooler in the summer, but it would be very hard to keep something so exposed warm in the winter. It's also probably pretty dark in there too, pretty dark and dim in the winter months. So not very spacious or luxurious, that's for sure. They had very long days. They had to work very hard. The frequency of crop failures happened. It was a dry territory. There wasn't a lot of moisture, so they had to come up with different strategies of dry farming methods, including making sure that they were digging only during times when the grass was or the earth was actually wet. So they had to be very careful. There was a lot of severe weather conditions like drought. And even when that wasn't enough, sometimes they would have some kind of other problem like grasshopper infestations and things like that that could make things go from bad to worse. So they had quite a bit to deal with, either insects or weather, just the dirty nature of having to live out on the open plains like that, and the possibility of eventually losing your farm. It says here in this section, tenant farmers. Sometimes if the crops really got hit badly by weather or by crop failure or by bugs like grasshoppers, farmers lost money and they had to get loans more and more. Finally, they found themselves so far in debt they would actually lose their farms and end up renting the free land that they got, that they had hoped to have to win their independence. It didn't always exactly work out that way, unfortunately. So, as we see here for our goals, remember the timber and oil industries were huge in the West, and established a lot of new industries and a lot of new money going into the West, connected by the railroad. And it was the Homestead Act that really established a lot of the growth of the farms on the Great Plains. Okay, the hardships that we discussed for farmers in this area were the long days, very hard work, frequent crop failures, a lot of severe weather, and also the possibility of losing your farm altogether and becoming a tenant farmer. All this material is covered on pages 469 to 475, and you do have a reading guide. So if you need to go back into the reading, make sure that you do that to fill out your reading guide and answer all of those questions that you have there. Okay. For this lesson, that's about it. You're going to see a prompt to do a graded assignment that has been removed from the course. You're just going to have two quizzes and a discussion this time around. So this will do it for 7.02, the changing West. Please make sure to complete those reading guides, as you're really going to need it for that 703 quiz. That is going to be worth 20 points. Next up is your 7.03 lesson recording, The End of a Way of Life, where we're going to talk about the conflict of Native Americans with the U.S. military, and how the West sadly came to a close as there was no more frontier. The areas all became pretty much settled, and the way of life of the Native American came to be a thing of the past. So that's going to be 703. See you then.